In this video, we're going to be talking about heat pump. We'll talk about the new refrigerants. We're going to be talking about dual fuel systems. We'll talk about high efficiency systems, single stage systems, the different types of heat pumps, whether you should pair your heat pump with a furnace or whether you should pair it with an air handler. We're even going to talk about heat pumps that work best for varying climates, because if you live in a cold climate, there's certain heat pumps that will outperform compared to the best heat pump when you're living in a very hot climate. And we're going to be covering all of this and more, as well as some of the tax credits that are available and might be changing. But before we get started, if you haven't done so already, please smash that like button and consider subscribing to the channel for the algorithm. If you're tuning into this channel for the first time and you've never seen any of our content, that's fine. You can watch this video first and see if it's worth subscribing to the channel. But if you do get value from this video or any of the other videos on our channel, a free way that you can support the channel is just simply by subscribing, and it is much appreciated. So first off, we're going to give you a high-level rundown of the different types of heat pumps that are on the market. So if you look at the varying SEER ratings or efficiency ratings, you might see numbers ranging from 14 SEER all the way up to 25 or even 30 SEER if you're looking at some of the ductless heat pumps. Now, if you're looking for a video specifically about ductless systems or ductless heat pumps, that's not what we're going to be covering in this video, because we're going to be doing a deep dive on traditional forced air or central air systems. But I'll make sure to link that ductless video at the end, because we did make a video about ductless heat pumps and some of the changes in 2025, so you can find that information. But the bottom line is that the types of heat pumps that exist are basically going to fall into one of three categories. Now, your basic simple heat pump is going to be what's called a single stage heat pump. Above that, you have a two-stage or a multi-stage heat pump, and then the highest end systems, or the higher end, because there are varying levels of these systems, are what's called inverter driven heat pumps. Now, inverter driven heat pumps are my personal favorite and the best, especially for certain climates. If you're in an extremely hot climate, these are going to be great, because a heat pump is just an air conditioner with a reversing valve. So when your heat pump is running in the summer to cool down your home, having a high efficiency inverter system is going to make it the most efficient system to operate. But there's a bunch of other benefits that come with it that I'll talk on later. But just to give you a rundown of how these systems actually work, a single stage system does exactly what it sounds like. It has one stage of heating, one stage of cooling. It's either on or it's off. There's nothing fancy about it. And that's really what it's designed for. So if you have a smaller home, or you don't have very high energy bills, or you don't use your system that often because you live in a very temperate climate, but you still are in the market for a heat pump, a single stage system might be perfect for you, especially in, when I define moderate temperatures, that would be anything between, let's say, the range of 40 degrees and 90 degrees, or 40 degrees and 100 degrees. And that's in Fahrenheit, obviously. That range of temperatures is going to be something that's really efficient for a single stage system to operate. And it's just a good bang for your buck if you're looking for the simplest system. Now, a step above this, and is not really a system that we often recommend, is what's called a two-stage or a multi-stage system. Now, the reason we often don't recommend two-stage systems, except in specific scenarios, which I'll touch on in a second, most of the times it's not that big of a jump to actually go from a two-stage system up to an inverter, and oftentimes the prices are almost identical, or can even be cheaper for some of the inverter-driven systems on the market, like one of our favorites, which is the daikin fit system, which, even though it's an inverter, is actually cheaper than the two-stage version from that same manufacturer. But two-stage systems, they do work well. The only difference between a two-stage or any multi-stage system and, let's say, a single-stage system is that it does what it sounds like. It has multiple speeds. So think about a two-stage or a three-stage air conditioner as something that has a 2 or 3-speed transmission, like you would in a car. So it can either go on medium speed, high speed, or, full speed. And that's the difference between these different systems. Now, the reason we like inverters, and I'll spend a little bit more time explaining the benefits of an inverter, because this is one of our favorite systems, and I'll talk about when to use these, especially compared to, the two-stage or the single-stage systems. Inverter-driven systems are, number one, most efficient. Number two, they're most quiet. Number three, for about the same cost, oftentimes, as a two-stage or three-stage system, you can get an inverter-driven product, which essentially gives you a lot more stages, because the system modulates along a continuum. So if you got into your car, for example, and let's say it could only go 30 miles an hour or 0 miles an hour, That would be an example of a single stage system. But what most of us are used to when we're driving, at least, is if you get into the car, you go from 0 miles per hour up to 30 miles per hour, which along the way you might be going 3 miles an hour, then 17 miles an hour, and all those different speeds are important to make the ride smooth and comfortable. And the same is true for inverter driven products. Now, in addition to this, a lot of the inverters are going to be the quietest systems on the market. The daikin fit, when it's running in quiet mode, for example, can run at 45 decibels. Mitsubishi systems, a lot of the other products that are out there, all the side discharge systems from all the manufacturers can be very quiet as well. So the specs are going to vary across the board. We just happen to be daikin dealers, so that's why I'm familiar with that decibel rating off the top of my head. It's a very quiet system, but the bottom line is the comfort and the quiet aspect of that heat pump is going to make it something that makes your home more comfortable to be in, because you don't get a big gush of air when the system first kicks on. Now, keep in mind, because the system is modulating in the higher speeds, at the higher temperatures, it will ramp up very quickly. And so it will do that. Like if it's 110 degrees outside, it's going to ramp up quickly, even though it's an inverter. And the reason is because it's hot out and it wants to cool down your house. The same is not necessarily true in the heating months, unless there is a big temperature differential between the set point and what the system is operating at. And what I mean by temperature differential is, think of an inverter system as a smart system, meaning if you go out of town for a week and you set your thermostat at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you come back in town and you set it to 70 degrees, because there is a 20-degree temperature differential when you get back into your house, that system is going to ramp up quicker because it wants to heat your house quickly, and it knows there is a 20-degree temperature difference, so it's not going to overheat your house if it ramps up quickly to 100% capacity, because it actually needs that full 100% capacity in order to operate effectively. So that's a basic rundown of the 3 different styles or types of system. Now, what you might not realize is that your heat pump actually has an indoor component as well that it has to pair with. So your heat pump is the condenser that sits outside, but it's also going to pair with an indoor unit, and it's either going to pair with a furnace and evaporator coil, which is going to make up the indoor portion of your heat pump, or it's going to pair with an air handler. Now, an air handler is a more traditional method of pairing a system with a heat pump, but it's common to pair both, and it really depends on your specific climate. So if you are in a moderate climate, a climate that doesn't get temperatures below freezing, for example, someplace like Phoenix, Arizona, you're not going to need a furnace, but a lot of homes in Phoenix still have furnaces for heating. So because you already have that existing infrastructure, it would make sense to put in a furnace and do a dual fuel system in that application. Now, the reason this is called a dual fuel system is because you'll have a furnace and you'll also have a heat pump. And when that system is set up, you can set the heat pump to run as your primary source of heating, and then the furnace will only run on the coldest nights of the year. Now, in a metro like Phoenix that I just mentioned, because the lows rarely get below 40s in, the actual metro of Phoenix, and so it's not really getting freezing ever. It'll get cold, but it's not an emergency if your heat goes out to where you could deal with frozen pipes or really catastrophic damage to your home like you could in a place like Minnesota or Montana, where it gets very cold in the winter months. If you wanted to go with an all-electric system where you just have an air handler and your condenser outside, the benefit of this system is that typically this is going to be more cost effective because you don't have to have an added furnace and evaporator coil, and so it can reduce the cost of installation. And that's one of the biggest benefits with going with a straight air handler paired with a heat pump. But if you're in a colder climate, oftentimes you will find yourself opting for a dual fuel system just for both comfort and efficiency's sake, because they are more efficient, oftentimes are more efficient to operate, or from a cost perspective, depending on what the natural gas rates are in your region. So I'll give you a few examples of a few systems and where I would use these and what type of matchups I would create. Now, let's say you live in Denver, Colorado. That's our market that we serve. And in Denver region, one of our favorite systems that we install is the daikin fit heat pump. And we like to pair those with an 80% efficient furnace and just the evaporator coil that is matched with that particular system. Now, the reason we like to pair pair it with an 80% efficient furnace is because we have a relatively moderate climate here. If your heat pump is going to be running until, let's say, it's 20 degrees outside before switching to backup heat, which would be your backup furnace, then you don't necessarily need to have a high efficiency furnace because the furnace won't be running that often. Now, if you lived in a climate like Minnesota or Montana or someplace where you have single digit lows for months on end and your heat pump might not be running during those times or not be running efficiently to where it can satisfy the full load on the house, and so you'll need that backup furnace to run full time. In those instances, I would pair that same heat pump, like the Daikin Fit enhanced heat pump. I would pair that with a high efficiency furnace, and the reason is because you'll get the benefit of a little bit more efficient heat pump on the warmer days or on the shoulder seasons, but in the dead of winter in January, if you get a really long cold stretch, you'll still have a high efficiency furnace to provide you with a lot of cost savings or gas savings, especially if you're off grid, are using propane versus natural gas, because propane is typically much more expensive to operate. Now, that's kind of dual fuel systems in a nutshell. And if I was in a market like Phoenix and I had the option to choose either an air handler or a furnace with a heat pump, I would go for a straight air handler. And there's, in the instance of the Daikin Fit that I mentioned earlier, that product line actually has a 120 volt air handler that can actually replace your furnace as a direct swap. So if you have an existing furnace and you're looking to get rid of it and just go with the heat pump because you do not need backup heat in a warmer or more moderate climate like Phoenix, Arizona, then that would be kind of my preference in that region. Now, I want to take a moment right now to talk about some of the specific changes that actually are happening in 2025, because a lot of times in HVAC, technology is relatively slow to evolve. You don't get big, giant technological changes every single year that are massively disrupting the equipment, because it takes a while to manufacture the equipment. So the types of equipment and the increases in efficiency tend to happen more gradually over a period of years versus all at once. However, this year in 2025, because the new refrigerants are being phased in to replace R410A, and I'll talk about what that means for you if you have an R410A system. No, it does not mean you have to get rid of that system. All it means is that they are starting the phase out process of that refrigerant, which is actually going to take an additional 15 years from today before they stop manufacturing it. But the bottom line is, if you have a 410A system, not to worry, you don't have to rush out and replace it right away. But if you have some concerns about the new refrigerant, I want to talk about that now. Now, there's two new refrigerants that are coming to the North American market. One is R32 and the other is R454B. Now, I don't expect you to remember those random numbers, but the bottom line is these refrigerants are a newer class of refrigerants. They're going to do two things. Number one is they're going to be slightly more efficient. And number two, they have a lower GWP. Now, GWP is a rating scale created that stands for global warming potential. And each of these refrigerants have a GWP based on how they affect the ozone layer. That has to do with ODP, which is ozone depletion potential. No refrigerants now have an ODP anymore, because any refrigerants that cause damage to the ozone layer were actually removed from service. And so now you're just dealing with refrigerants still have a GWP because they have some sort of greenhouse gas effect. Now, that doesn't mean your heat pump is releasing these gases into the atmosphere. It's actually a sealed system, so you shouldn't be using refrigerant regularly. Sometimes it will leak out. That happens especially on older systems. And so that's why they do want to phase in newer, more efficient refrigerants. I talk about these refrigerants in another video, so if you're interested in that, I'll make sure to link the video specifically on refrigerants at the end. But I do want to talk about some of the concerns about these refrigerants and what you can expect. One of the things that was brought up is that these refrigerants are classified as slightly flammable or mildly flammable, and they are a class of refrigerant called A2L. What that means is that if you hold a lighter to it or any sort of ignition source to it to keep it lit, it is technically flammable, but it will extinguish as soon as that source is removed. Now, there's safety equipment inside of your furnace, and the truth is R410A, which is the refrigerant you're currently using right now, is actually 50% R32 anyways. It's actually a blend of R32. And so the truth is, it's really not that big of a deal. If it was a big deal or a big liability, they wouldn't be putting it in your home. Now, of both of these refrigerants, refrigerants. R32 has been in use overseas in Europe for several years, so it is a battle-tested refrigerant. Anytime a new product line comes in, some people are hesitant because they feel like they might be the guinea pig with these new wave of refrigerants or new wave of products in any product line, just like when you get the new iPhone and it has a bunch of glitches for a few weeks or months until there's software updates. But the bottom line is that R32, because it's been in use for a while, you probably won't have those same problems. The same is probably true for R454B because they have done a lot of R&D on these different products. But in general, the refrigerant is not a personal concern of mine. So if you're losing sleep over which refrigerant to get or which system to get, I'll talk about the most important consideration when it comes to getting a heat pump and why it's the most important consideration. But by far, it is not the refrigerant type. It's very low on the list, but it's just something to be aware of. And that's why we're talking about it in this video. And like I said, if you're interested in seeing the refrigerant specific video, I'll make sure to link that at the end because we do a deeper dive on that topic. Now, there's a few more things I want to touch on in this video. And if you're not familiar with heat pumps, you might have heard some rumors or heard something from a contractor that gave you a bid with a statement like heat pumps do not work in cold climates. Now, the truth is this might have been true 20 years ago, but today this couldn't be further from the truth. There are lots of heat pumps that maintain 100% capacity all the way below 0 degrees Fahrenheit before they start to lose capacity or derate. Back in the day, they used to start to derate around 40 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that's why people would say things like heat pumps don't work in cold climates, but they absolutely do today. There's certain types of heat pumps that work better in different types of climates. They tend to be the inverter driven heat pumps that I mentioned, as well as the side discharge style heat pumps, which items like the Daikin fit or any of the Mitsubishi products, because a side discharge system, the way that they are designed, they tend to be designed to hold up better in cold climates. There's other systems that hold up in cold climates as well. The bottom line is your contractor, if they are familiar with heat pumps and heat pumps in cold climates, they will be familiar with whether or not the system they're recommending for you will work in your specific region and at what temperature to set both a changeover temperature where it switches to your backup heat, whether that's backup electric heat or a backup furnace. But the bottom line is this is just a myth. So if that is a concern of yours, that is old information. And so if a contractor told you that, I would let that go by the wayside because it's absolutely not true. Now, every time I make a statement like that, inevitably someone always goes in the comments and says something along the lines of, I live in northern Alaska and it's -50. Will a heat pump work in my region? Because I don't think they will. Well, no. If you happen to be close to the North Pole, chances are a heat pump is not going to be a good option for you. You could do a geothermal heat pump, which I'm not going to get into in this video because they have very specific applications where they make sense. Like this one, when you're living above the Arctic Circle in an extremely cold climate, off the grid, and your choices of heating are very expensive propane or perhaps a geothermal system. But in general, for anyone in the contiguous 48 states, a heat pump will work for your specific area. Heat pumps work in Canada, and there's plenty of options to choose from. The big thing is just finding a contractor that knows what they're doing and is familiar with the technology that you're looking to get installed. Now, there's a couple more things we're going to talk about in this video. Specifically, we're going to touch on tax credits, and we're also going to talk about how to choose the right contractor, because the biggest decision is not going to be the brand of equipment or the type of equipment or even the SEER rating or single stage versus multi-stage. The most important consideration is going to be the contractor you choose, and I'll tell you why. But first, let's talk about the tax credits that are available currently and how you can take advantage of some of these. Now, right now on all air source heat pumps, which are traditional style heat pumps, there is a $2,000 tax credit that is federal. And on a state level, some states are offering additional heat pump incentives. For example, the state of Colorado has a $1,500 tax credit also available for anyone that installs a heat pump. And there's different rebate programs in every single state for every single utility provider. For example, Xcel Energy is our utility provider in Colorado, but they're also a utility provider in several surrounding states like Utah or Arizona, or maybe not Arizona, I believe parts of Nevada and New Mexico. But the bottom line is they have a big territory, and I know that they cover Colorado because that's the region we cover. And some of their rebates can be anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 for heat pumps. So I'm not going to cover every rebate in the nation because we simply don't have time for that. But the bottom line is, on a federal level, you have a $2,000 heat pump tax credit. And in addition, you have another heat pump tax credit that is applicable specifically for geothermal heat pumps. Now, geothermal systems are limited in application, but a geothermal heat pump qualifies for up to a 30% tax credit of the total purchase price. The reason for this much larger tax credit is the fact that it is very expensive to install a geothermal system because you have to drill in addition to running loops for that system. So it is not a cheap endeavor to get done. And that's why they do give that big tax credit. Now, one of the things I want to touch on in relation to this is, obviously with the new administration coming in, there has been talk of repealing a lot of tax credits as it relates to EVs or heat pumps, just in general reduction of government spending. And right now, as of the filming of this video, this is the start of the new year, I can't really speak to what's going to happen because we don't know if these heat pump tax credits are going to be repealed anytime soon, what's going on with the rest of the tax credits. The bottom line is, right now, these, as of the filming of this video, these tax credits are good through 2032. So if you're planning on replacing your system in 2025, 2029, or 2032, or anytime in between now and then, you can qualify for that $2,000 heat pump tax credit. That might change by the end of the year, so we'll see how things unfold, but that's just something I want to mention. And the reason I'm talking about this is not because I'm trying to sell you on how it is important to hire us or hire someone else. I literally have no skin in the game. I don't care. You can hire whoever you want. There's an expression that a bad job is not a good deal at any price. So I'm not trying to advise you to not hire the cheapest bid or not, go hire the most expensive bid or the fanciest contractor for any particular reason, other than if you hire a contractor that follows the best practices for installation, you're going to have less problems and less issues when it comes to getting that equipment serviced, and it won't have as many service issues. The bottom line is that brand, in my opinion, is not as important, and I'll explain why. One of the most common things people ask us is, hey, what's the best brand of HVAC? Which brand should I get? Now, obviously, any of the big name brands can be good. They can also have problems. And a lot of that comes down to how the system was sized, whether you have the right size ductwork, whether it's sized properly for the home, whether it was installed properly. And certain things that happen when a system is installed properly is things like pulling a vacuum, charging the system with nitrogen at a minimum. Some of the systems call for a triple evac of nitrogen, which is where I don't even need to get into it in this video. It's kind of nerdy stuff, but the bottom line is, it is not your job to know this stuff, but it is the contractor that you hire's job to know this stuff, because that can be the difference between a system working well, trouble-free for years, or you having repeated issues and repeated service calls, wondering why your system isn't keeping up and isn't working properly. But I wouldn't worry so much about the brand, because if you put in a brand like Daikin or Mitsubishi or Carrier or Trane or any of the other big name brands that you've heard of, chances are the system is going to work, and it's going to work fine as long as it was installed properly. And even if it's the perfect install, the bottom line is this stuff is made in a factory. And so they'll still have components that go out under warranty, and having a good contractor that's going to come out and honor that warranty and take care of it for you is going to make all the difference in making it so that it's a trouble-free experience or as painless as possible. If you take the best air conditioner or heat pump for a market like Phoenix and you install it in a market like Minnesota, because it was designed specifically for a certain climate or does better under certain operational parameters in terms of outdoor ambient temp, indoor load, things like that, that particular system might not work well there. And that's why having a good local contractor that knows how to guide you through that process is the most important. That's why having a local contractor that's familiar with the products you're interested in and what works well will make sure that you are happy at the end of the day and get a system that works effectively. So we hope you found this content helpful. And if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel, as well as smashing that like button for the algorithm. And promised earlier, there's a few videos popping up on the screen right now, so make sure you check those out if you haven't done so already, and we will catch you on the next episode.